Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director. Our speaker today brings a wealth of personal, operational experience to the effort to develop combat aircraft of the future. He knows what it's like to fly in harm's way and to operate in a game of aggression and survival in a hostile environment. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Scott Krambeck, United States Navy, retired.
Well, good morning, everybody. I have to say it's an absolute thrill on this non-rainy morning to take the drive up from San Diego to be here in Torrance and the Western Museum of Flight. Great to have everybody here. I hope you enjoy what I'm about to show you. It's a unique experience to be on the ground floor of a program, a small little $20 billion program that took off a few years ago, but I think it'll give you some insights on at least what I was going through. And that's the lens of which I'm going to explain to you where I was in the program office, what I saw. You may hear other opinions of how things went, but this is from my point of view, and also from some of the reading that I've done of things that I didn't know what was going on at the time when I was there. So I'll hopefully get to share that with you. So this is the birth, back from 2001 to 2006. A little background on myself. I'm a simple Iowa boy, okay, who wanted to go and get involved with airplanes. And went to high school in Iowa and went to the Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, which I hope this weekend, when they have Selection Sunday, the news will be good as I watch my Cyclones. Aerospace engineering major there, and I was fortunate to go to the Naval Postgraduate School a few years later and get a master's and a postmaster's there. So go Navy. And my Navy career, half my career was operational, predominantly in the F-14, and I wanted to get into the new stuff. So the rest of my career was in more of the acquisition, of which I was in the F-14 program, the F-18 program, the F-35 obviously, and then my major command, acquisition command, was in the MIDS program, which, and if anyone's familiar with Link 16, that's the box that gives that capability, which is in all kinds of platforms. As I went from each program, because I was an F-14 guy, and I said, hey, I want to go work on the Super Hornet, they said, well, hey, Cram, you're going to the dark side, okay? And so I get to the F-18 program, and a gent from a Joint Strike Fighter wanted to come down to Pax River. I wanted to go up and more to the DC area. And so I went to the F-35 program, and when I left the F-18 program, they said, hey, Cram, you know, you're going to the dark side, you know. And so my entire life, I've been going to the dark side. So this will be a presentation about what the dark side looks like. So there's a photo of me back in when I was much younger and when I was the program manager at MIDS. As was mentioned, I do have my career operational, and so I thought I'd throw some pictures on here to kind of show you what I went through. And if they're a little bit small, I apologize. But living in operations, 1986. For the more of the folks with gray hair, you remember the line of death that we had to cross. That was 1986. What people aren't familiar with is Flogger Day in 1988, when a few MiG-23s came off the coast of Cameron Bay, and they decided to mix it up with us, and we had 13 separate engagements, of which not a shot was fired as we engaged those airplanes. At first we thought they were Vietnamese pilots, but we later found out that they're actually Soviet pilots flying that airplane. And we had great video of all the weapons on board, so they could not complain that they were unarmed. They were definitely armed. So you can see that one picture. That is actual Flogger that we were able to take a picture of, because by the end of the day they weren't fighting too much. 1988 deployment, Praying Mantis, Samuel B. Roberts hit a mine, and we retaliated. And you can see, I think that's the Sabalan frigate from the Iranian Navy that got hit. That was the one that didn't sink. The other one sank, but that one was out of commission for 3 months. And then the Iraq War was going on that time in the Persian Gulf. And while we weren't directly involved, we were certainly in there getting pictures and video of what was going on. And so that's a picture that I actually took after an Iraqi hit a oil platform in the Gulf. Desert Storm, this was after the shock and awe when our carrier showed up, and so you see us flying by the oil fields. and by Kuwait City, and all of the radars that were knocked out. And then, of course, fly-in. For Navy guys, flying off the carrier, there's nothing like to be 400 miles off the coast and hoping your airplane is up, because we had to get every single airplane up and flying to get off the carrier, and then you land back at home and the family's there. So I got some shots of the fly-in. When you're flying in a 12-plane or 14-plane formation, it gets kind of dicey. It's all about getting there safe. And then some other pictures of me, and there we are on alert status. Of course, my pilot and I are a little asleep there in the morning, but that's actually an Alert 5 that we took a picture of me with a Hornet, and that's dear old Dad, which I'll talk about in a little bit on one of the fly-ins. Speaking of the family, my dad is a retired senior chief, Korean vintage, and 4 years there, and then he was in reserve for like 37 years. And that's a picture of us when I got commissioned in 1982, and he thought, hey, it'd be a great idea to get a picture. And then that's another picture of 2022, and he is going to be 93 this year and still with us. And I think he still has a beer in his hand today. That is his famous quote, by the way. I may not always be right, but I'm never wrong, which always confused me when I was a 10-year-old. And that's my family down at Casa de Krambeck in San Diego. Laura, my wife, and I have identical twin girls that are 13 going on 17. And they were born for the ladies here at 26 weeks, 1 pound, 10 ounces. So, and that's them today in 2024 on the right side. My inspiration, I thought I'd throw this in there because each of us have had teachers in our lives that had made a big impression, and mine was when I was 10 years old, Miss Geraldine Day, my 4th grade teacher. She's one who could take someone who maybe didn't have the confidence and say, you can do this, go for the sky, do whatever you want to do, and that really lit the spark in me of perhaps I can excel. And I've kept up with her over the years. That's a picture of her in 1969 in front of our grade school. And in 2015, we reconnected, and I made a flight to Sioux City, Iowa, where I was born. And she's still alive today and kicking, and every time I go back there, I see her. The other inspiration was Brigadier General George Bud Day, who was a colonel until recently when he was actually promoted to Brigadier General after his death. But if you have not heard of Bud Day, I'm thinking the Air Force folks have, but you can come up and see this later. But this is a book about this gentleman who was one of the most amazing aviators of our time. He flew the Misty aircraft in Vietnam, and he was tailing Charlie. So after you do a strike, he's the one that got to fly over and get all the pictures of the bomb damage assessment, right? Never got shot at, right? No, they're waiting for him. Medal of Honor recipient, and then a POW. Matter of fact, he's the one that when John McCain got shot down, he was his cellmate and helped him get back to health. And John said he's the bravest man he ever knew. So that's a picture of him, and that's his wife, Doris. I'll say that again. His wife is Doris Day, not the actress, but just, and he was born in Sioux City as well as where I was. Now, the reason I put this on here is in 2015, when I rehooked up with Miss Day, she had mentioned that her first cousin was Colonel Bud Day. I says, you have got to be kidding me. I've been following this guy all my life. And, he was a POW. She goes, I know. And I said, so when I was in 4th grade, how come you never mentioned that your cousin was in a prison in Hanoi? And she goes, you guys were 4th graders. I'm not going to bring that up. But when Bud died in, I think, 2013, she was actually the oldest living Day in the family and actually gave the eulogy for that. So that's the connection we have. And one more thing, when I met my mother-in-law, Laura's mother, we talked about Bud Day. She says, let me bring you something. And if you can remember back in those days, used to buy bracelets for all the POWs, and she brought out the bracelet of Bud Day, of which she gave to me. And I'm like, things line up in your life that are just the most interesting things. But we're here. to talk about the F-35 program. Let me go back a little bit about how it started, because it was really in 1993 when the Joint Advanced Strike Technology Program and this other program called CAPT, the Common Affordable Lightweight Fighter, was going on, and they said, hey, this is pretty similar, let's bring them together. And in 1993, 94 I should say, they combined them. And so for the next 3 years was study time. Bring us the concepts concerning vertical lift, aircraft, sensors, and maybe perhaps with the failure of the F-111 being a joint type of fighter, maybe we can put this together with the new technologies of today. And 4 companies were listed there, were involved. And I put down the X-32 and the X-35 because that was really when the X-35 and X-32 were really starting to be put together by those 2 companies. And I was fortunate, I was on the staff of the Commander of Naval Air Force at the time. And 1996, they were coming through kind of showing their concepts. And the one that stood out for me, not in a good way, was Lockheed Martin's, because it had this shaft attached to an engine that went to a lift fan. And I said, you mean like a shaft on a helicopter and that thing's spinning like crazy? And they said, yeah, that's our concept. And you're going to engage that with this lift fan, so the shaft's going 3,000 revolutions per minute, and how are you going to do that? Well, we're going to use a clutch. You mean like a clutch on a car? And they go, yeah, like a clutch on a car. I go, and that's going to work? Are you serious? I'm going, man, that just looks super high risk to me. I mean, because when that shaft breaks, you know, it's all over with. You're not flying anymore. So that was my first indication of what was coming at the time. But it really wasn't until the concept demonstration phase in 1997 kicked off. They down selected 2 Boeing and Lockheed, and I think everyone has heard of this program, and had essentially a prototype fly-off, of which there were only 4 requirements for that program. So it was pretty much wide open for the contractors to kind of build what they wanted to build, but go demonstrate 4 things. And at the same time that was going on, the requirements was going through cycles in the Pentagon of, okay, if we're going to do a joint program, and what are the operational requirements? And so about at the same time that phase was finishing, then they submitted their proposals in 2001. And out of that, the winner was Lockheed, obviously. Obviously, because that's the aircraft that's flying today. That started in 2001. I actually got to the program in December of 2001, like at the very end, right after, during the holiday period. And things were moving quick right when I got there in January. Contract award in October. The JORD, Joint Operational Requirements Document, had 4 signatures: Air Force, Navy, Marines, and the UK. So that's real important as I go through this, because when you go back to the requirements, it wasn't all of these other countries that were throwing requirements at us. It was really settled, and if there's any requirement changes, you had to go back to those signatories and make changes. And so that was put in a little booklet called the Joint Operational Requirements Booklet. This is actually the one that I used in the program office, because you can imagine 435 performance-based requirements, and there's a debate in the meeting of what the requirement is. Well, you could just open this right up and go to it, and there's the requirement right there. And so we carried this around a lot during the design phase, because you always have to go back. What is the operational requirement that has to be met in this effort? So, and this was a replacement for the F-16 AV-8B, which we have a Sea Harrier right behind us here. And the C version of the Hornet, the Navy's plan was the C's are going to be retired. We'll have the E's and F's, and the F-35 is going to replace that aircraft, at least on the Navy side. And there's the 2 pictures of the concept demonstration phase, the mini guppy that was labeled in the program office. And actually the competition between the 2 was quite close in the proposal phase. The aspects of what came out of CDP were important, but you'll see that there's a whole lot of other things that both of the offers put in, and when I arrived it said the winner and then the close second. And talking with the folks that were involved with that, which I wasn't, they said it was a lot closer than what you would think. I like this chart a lot, not because it has so much the vision and the mission statement, which I'll let you read, But what was not on here before was the 4 pillars of the program, because it just wasn't the performance of the aircraft. You have lethal, survivable, supportable, and affordable. And the vast majority of a cost in a program is in the production of the vehicle or the system, and the tail end, the supportability. Just go on Wikipedia and look this up, and you'll see it. So there was a tremendous amount of focus within the requirements document of getting the production costs down, similar to the cost of the airplane it was replacing, and then how can we support this better of these high-cost airplanes that we're currently fielding in all the services on the supportability side. And you'll see that through the presentation. And affordability. And every time when we were going through design reviews, they would always have a thing of how this affected the cost of the airplane, building it, and the supportability of it. Something that was not really known that much. I wanted to cover the program structure of who's who in the zoo and how it was structured. So you had the program executive officer, usually 1 or 2 star, generally a 2-star. The deputy in the other service, you wouldn't have them in the same service, was the deputy executive program manager. And I could have put the whole Ouija board on here, but I concentrated on the air vehicle and the international directorate. So with all the countries and their representatives, they work very closely with the international directorate. But within the air system, that's when the contract was awarded to Lockheed. It was just Lockheed, it was a $20 billion contract, okay? And the air vehicle IPT, integrated product team, had 17 billion of that 20 billion. So you could see where the heavy lifting was being done. But then they had 2 engines being produced in the propulsion IPT and in the autolog, autonomic logistics, which essentially for autonomic means it just happens automatically. Okay, so that was the concept of, instead of doing a lot of paperwork, having a lot of automation in that. So 17 billion was in the air vehicle IPT, and you see the other IPTs, airframe weapons, base and ship shootability became huge because Lockheed had not worked much on carrier bases, mostly Air Force. That was a real eye-opener for them. And then the missions IPT and the vehicle systems IPT. And anything that you couldn't fit in those IPTs went to the system engineering integration team, which is the team that I led. So what was in that? They had all the flight sciences. So every time that we made a change to the airplane, put it through wind tunnels, did all that stuff, we would update all of the performance characteristics of the airplane. I had the signature team, which is the low observable team, which was absolutely fascinating. And actually the main focus was on the supportability. How can we make it more affordable to keep the signature of the aircraft where it should be? Tremendous amount of effort went into that. We had people that worked on B-2 and the F-22 that came in, because that was really what was kicking them when they went operational. Then I had the thermal team. I had the health prognosis team of the health of the aircraft. And then I had, luckily for me, the weight team, which there was no weight requirement in the F-35. You had all of these performance-based requirements, and if you cut that up, there is room for Lockheed to have the freedom to make changes to the airplane, whatever they wanted, and whatever weight came out to that design when it was meeting all the performance-based requirements, that was going to be the weight of the airplane. And of course, there was a weight bogey that was on the engines too, so they had to stay within that as well. So that's how everything was structured at the time when I was there. One of my favorite charts, the family of aircraft, which kind of gives some highlights of them. The CTOL, conventional takeoff and landing aircraft. The carrier variant, which if you can't tell from this, that wing is slightly bigger. For approaches to the carrier, we had a requirement of the speed on that. And such, it could carry more fuel, and it has a better combat range. And then you see the STOVL, short takeoff and vertical landing aircraft. And right behind it, you can see where the lift fan is. That took the place of a big gas tank that was on the CTOL airplane. So that has the least amount of fuel, and thus the range requirements for that are for different. Pretty much, CTOL and STOVL were about the same plan form. Matter of fact, Commonality amongst the aircraft when it first started was about 80% between the CTOL and the STOVL, and about 60% across all of the variants of the aircraft. That changed over time because I'll show you the G-forces on them were different for each aircraft. Let's see. You got the 3-bearing swivel nozzle. In front of that engine is a shaft that goes to the lift fan and a clutch. The risks for, at that time, was really on the clutch and the 3-bearing swivel nozzle, which the engine actually zips down and moves around as it needs to. As we got into the program, that risk was pretty much retired. That system was working great. And the tough nut was the clutch, which we were able to conquer as we went along. Another one of my favorite charts, weapons and carriage requirements. I would suggest that is a lot of variability of the weapons that were going to be assigned to this platform. We had an internal weapons bay, which I'll talk about, the blob of bombs that we could put in there, and it just wasn't one. There's a whole bunch of variation of it. You could carry air-to-air weapons and air-to-ground weapons, and when the air-to-air weapons went and shot, the doors would come open, the launcher would come down, and then you could fire it, clearing the airplane, and then it'd button right back up. And the same thing happened when you were dropping air-to-ground weapons. In the center is what was targeted, and anything in purple that we were going to certify for the first operational squadron when it IOC'd. So it wasn't the entire gambit over an aircraft program's life. You're going to have a whole bunch of weapons that are going to be certified for it, but that's what we were targeting in the requirements document. Pretty impressive. Okay, so in the development phase, you got the aircraft, you got the pilots, and you got the maintainers. There's the aircraft with the F-135 and F-136 engines that were interchangeable. One of the requirements was if you're on a carrier and an F-136 goes down, you can take an F-135 and hook it up. So therefore the interface had to be good for both engines, and it was undefined by the government. Okay, so we got these two superstar engine makers to get in the same room together and say, go figure it out. Okay, that was very entertaining to watch. So why two engines? I can tell you from the F-14 community and F-18 community, when you're stuck with one engine manufacturer, you're stuck in essentially a non-competitive situation for the cost of the engine, and more so if there's an issue with the engine that it gets deployed, you may have to ground squadrons until that's finally resolved. So if you're Pratt & Whitney and you're having an issue, then GE's going to stand up and say, hey, I got some engines for you. You know, you can take them. So it really puts the emphasis, hey, let's solve this problem real quickly on either one. I have seen that in my MIDS program. I had multiple vendors in my MIDS program when I was a major program manager, and in 10 years we reduced the cost of the MIDS box by 75% by yearly competition, because it was the industry that leaned out their processes in the competitive process. It wasn't being dictated what to. So that was the whole spirit of that. And these engines are, $3 million, $5 million a piece. That was the whole concept. Let's qualify two. We know it's going to cost more money, but man, where's all the cost? It's in the production and the sustainment. That's where we're going to get our money back. And as everyone knows, eventually the F-136 was canceled for whatever reason. But that was where we were in 2001 and 2006. 3 different services, 8 international partners at different levels. The Brits contributed the most. They were a level 1 partner. Level 2 partners were Italy and the Dutch, who both right around $1 billion the development money came in. And the rest were tier 3. They contributed. So they got X amount of people in the program office depending upon what their tier status was. We had 2 other security cooperation partners, the Israelis and Singapore. They missed the line date to become a partner. They still tried to become a partner, and the U.S. State Department said, so you missed the date, but we'll create this other category called the security cooperation partner. They were pretty much in receive mode of being able to watch what the development was going on, and really had no other impact on the program. Team JSF with Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, which a lot of folks from Northrop Grumman here, BAE Systems. Rolls-Royce was a teammate with the lift fan and also a teammate with GE, and then Pratt & Whitney I think I mentioned everyone. Yes, that's good. Autonomic logistics, I talked a little bit about that, a little bit more detail. Picture yourself returning to the carrier. You got a health system on the aircraft that's saying this box is about 75% done. You better order a new one. That would be data linked back to the carrier, shot out to where they were doing their big performance-based logistics, and an order would be put in such that that could be delivered at a spot where it could be picked up sometime in the future. That was real time, and at that time we were going to buy 5,000 airplanes worldwide, and all that data was going to come into that system to do that, all automated. So that was the concept on autonomic logistics. 3 flight test facilities. If you were a Navy guy and you got orders to Eglin for flight school, you went there. So it was joint, international, different flight test facilities and training. So it would really be done in a joint, standardize everything. That was the concept. Domestic international suppliers, there was nothing listed for the countries of you're going to get 10% work share. It was best athlete. So if Denmark came in with this company that was just Star Wars good, but their costs were high, they probably didn't play well. And Lockheed managed all that. So they're looking for that knee in the curve. You know, really good company, cost is very competitive, and that became one of their suppliers. So they were trying to get to each of those targets for each country, but there was no specific requirement. And then domestic, of course, I think you can find a supplier in the United States in almost every congressional district in the country that is supplying something to the F-35. Global sustainment, talked a little bit about the logistics system. That was the big performance-based logistics that was going to be managed by Lockheed. Any aircraft flying around the world. And the interoperability, which I'll talk a little more, was something that really kicked our you-know-what, because the critical exchange requirements that were required in the program was extensive, and as you know, as technology goes on, they can never have enough. So that they kept on bringing more, trying to push that onto the F-35 as we went along. Here's the unique capabilities that I'll talk about. I could do 5 hours on the capabilities of the F-35, but commonality in manufacturing was huge. You can, if you go on the line of Lockheed right now, you will have an F-35A, 2 F-35Bs, an F-35C, any type of mixture going down the line on a day-to-day basis. They could take anything. So that was to lean out the manufacturing and keep that line going, is reducing cost to everyone. And it wasn't just the final assembly at Lockheed. Italy had plans for a final assembly in their country as well. So this is really a whole international thing. And then the commonality. The thought is the more that we can keep common parts, the less cost of the airplane is going to be. So you can see, as I mentioned at the start, yeah, we want that capability, but tremendous amount of focus on affordability and commonality. For the U.S., okay, F-35 big A, little F. You'll compare this airplane to the F-22. Yep, there's things the F-22 can do that this airplane can't. There's things the F-16 can do. Excuse me. This was the big A. You will not find another aircraft that can do the air-to-ground mission like this aircraft. And that's where all the requirements were in the Jord that I just showed you. Matter of fact, for strafing, there was all kinds of requirements of what that gun is supposed to do in an air-to-ground operational type of thing. There was absolutely hardly any in the air-to-air regime. We'll take fallout. Okay, so we'll be a little F, but we're going to be a big A and be the best close air support aircraft that we can be. For the U.S., the largest single engine in the country as far as thrust. And how'd they do that? It was mass flow through the front end of the airplane, and they turned up the wick in the turbine. And as I went through the CD critical design reviews and them watching that, I asked the engineers, how in the heck did you figure this out to cool those blades when you're turning up the wick? And they said, man, it's black art. And it was, because if you looked at how they cooled that, it's trial and error how they did that. So that's how they got all the thrust out of that. The Stovall lift fan, which we'll talk about more, and the 3-barrel swivel nozzle was amazing. 2 engine manufacturers from the get-go. G-loading were different. So on the airframe side, you're going to have some commonality go out the window in that regard. So there's 9G for the F-35A. Combat weight, F-35C was 7.5 and the B was 7 Gs. Internal weapons bay. The blob of bombs, which I had talked about before, low observable aircraft. The gun was actually internal. That was an Air Force requirement to the aircraft. For the UK and the Navy and the Marine Corps, we're not going to be doing close air support every mission. I'm not going to carry around 200 pounds of extra, so that was bolted on. Data links, we had the MADL, which was a specific F-35, similar to the iFiddle, I guess you would say, on the F-22, but it was for F-35, and then we had Link 16 transmit and receive. So the data going in and out of this airplane was tremendous. We did not have a heads-up display. I got a picture of that, the helmet there, and the actual challenge on the new helmet, where it would have all the displays, whether you're looking forward, around, down, didn't matter which way you're looking, you would have some type of displays on the helmet. Became with the problem was two problems. One was the center of gravity, particularly with the 98th percentile of women. The more that the weight center of gravity went forward, it would pull down, and on an ejection seat, it was dangerous for the women because naturally the men's neck muscles were a little bit stronger. So that is actually a picture of the redesign when all of that electronics was moved backwards to move that center of gravity back. Also, we had a problem with processing. You can imagine in a dynamic environment of flying and trying to keep that symbology stable as you're moving your head around, the first processors couldn't handle it. We had guys and gals in the simulator with all this jitter going on, and they had to stop the simulator because they were getting sick in the simulator. So that was a big challenge because this was 2001, and you know how processing has advanced over time, but that was able to get solved too. The distributed aperture system, unbelievable situated awareness. 6 of the sensors are around the aircraft. They could both do any type of electrical or optical type of input, and the whole concept was, and I put down there the fusion system of the mission system, including the radar, was to get all that data in, fuse it together, and then present valuable, needed information for the pilots. Don't overwhelm the pilots with a bunch of data. It's information they need in order to prosecute the mission. So there was a tremendous amount of electronics, memory, speed of the processors in order to do that. I talked about autonomic logistics. That was the ALICE system that actually did all that, the logistics information system. And the sustainment was a performance-based logistics, which I mentioned before too. Why was that picked? We had done a lot, at least in the F-18 program office, a lot of mini PBLs, which were hugely successful because we gave them a contract, we gave them targets to meet, and if they made that target, then they got a little bit extra bonus out of that. That was an incredible incentive for the companies that supported the F-18, but it was kind of in smaller. Okay, this is for the whole aircraft. It was ginormous. The aircraft itself, when I was there, had about 7 million single lines of code on software, and the ALICE had about 9 million. So that's 16 million lines of code. Back then, I'm sure it has grown over the years. The early timeline of the program, this is kind of laid out from an acquisition standpoint. Contract award in October, system requirements for you in January of 2002. Again, 435 performance-based requirements. We went down there for a week, and Lockheed had this sheet of taking all those requirements and racking them, stacking them, how they view those requirements. And most of them were pretty solid. We had some edits that we needed done, but the one that stood out for me was the alert launch, of which their concept of the alert launch was, okay, we're at a base and the enemy is coming in and we need to get everybody out. It's the get out of Dodge requirement. We didn't have that in the Navy. We had an alert 5 requirement that says in 5 minutes you need to taxi and launch, all systems need to be up 4.0. That was not their plan. So that's the kind of reviews we did to correct that interpretation, and of course that flowed down into the design. So that was the first thing in January. Integrated baseline review. Contractor puts their plan together, they put all their resources in there. And then we take a look at it with them and say, where's the risks in the program? And that took 2 weeks to do as we went through line by line of how they were going to execute that plan. Preliminary design review in the spring of 2003. That's the flow down of those requirements that we worked, and they come down and get their preliminary design done and the architecture complete, and they briefed it, okay? So this was down at Lockheed. In a year, we did all that work. It was theater. I was fortunate from being the CIT in the program with another CIT from Lockheed Martin. We were the MCs for the aircraft preliminary design review, and it was in a ginormous room. It was so big that they actually had to mock up the F-35 in the room in the back, and there must have been 2,000 people in there for, it's either a week or 2 weeks, where we went through. It included Northrop Grumman folks that were there, and Office of Secretary of Defense, all the services, all the syscoms. It was theater, I'm telling you. I'd never, ever been involved with anything like that as we went through the design, with a lot of action items after that as we went into detailed design. Critical design review was a year later. Now, prior to preliminary design, they were already doing some detailed design, and they kept on going through, and hopefully we could stay on schedule and keep meeting all the program milestones at that point. The program was, in my opinion, was just screaming fast. The amount of work was eye-watering. I think there was a thing called net meeting back then, and I would come in the office and be invited to these review meetings if I wasn't down at Lockheed, and we would have people in England on there, we'd have people from Australia on there, we'd have all these people on there, and they would go through some design changes on some certain part of the aircraft. And being in the CIT position, I was going to airframe meetings, I was going to mission system meetings, I was going to all of the other IPT meetings because we were helping on the integration of the aircraft. And it was just mind-boggling how quickly things were going. And what generally would happen is engineers would get conflicts in the morning when they woke up, and their job at the end of the day was to change that design to resolve that conflict and then insert it into the database. And at night when everyone was sleeping, that thing would crunch again, and it would come out, guess what, the next morning with conflicts that had to be done, because each of the teams were working. And it was just fascinating to see, from this simple boy from Iowa, this is just unbelievable how fast this was going. So critical design review, that was the plan, and first flight was December of 2005, which is good because that's when I was rotating from the program, and I'm going, yes, stay on schedule so I can be there for first flight and I can watch this baby grow up and get some wings. I threw this up. This is actually a simplified schedule, hoping that you could see it. You can see, and this I'm transported to 2006 because I'm going to come back to the weight issue. But it kind of shows you what's going on. You have the program events, the first flights and tests that's going on, the Defense Acquisition Board reviews that we had to do, and then the production side of the house. And you can see before in the previous chart, I said we're going to do in the spring of 2004 the critical design review, and it looks like it is already gone at least a year after that, and I'll explain why as we go later. So those were delayed. And then you had first flight, which was supposed to happen there soon in late 2006, which was not good for me because I wanted to rotate and have the first flight. But if you keep on coming down where that red line is, you'll see two letters in the production called LL. That means long lead for the aircraft. So right after critical design review, we were planning to start ordering parts. Okay? And then a year later, we're in full funding in low rate initial production. And our first flight just started in late 2006. That is challenging because you really need to get out and do some testing on the airplane. That will influence the design, get a little bit maturity in there before you start building those first test airplanes. And so that led to schedule concurrency. The whole program was set up when I got there with unbelievable concurrency. Something coming from the F-18 program, I'm like, I don't know how we're going to do this. How can you not have the design done, start building airplanes in low-rate production, and have no changes along the way. Not going to happen, okay? So it was going to be a challenge, and we knew that from the get-go. So, and you can see how the three different variants. So we had simultaneous things going on, whether it be STOVL, CTOL, CV, and design build software, massive software, particularly in the Alice system, getting all the flight test points done, and then actually getting into production. Very, very ambitious, and it was one of our biggest challenges in the program. Okay, again, June 2006, again, fast forward, after we had our weight issue, which I'll talk about, and green is good, meeting the requirement, blue is even better in all of these different areas. STOVL performance, I'll put down, you see VLBB, that's vertical lift bring back. The Sea Harrier right behind us probably has very little or no bring back, so when they launch on a mission with weapons, they got to drop them on something or get them off the airplane. And that was the same kind of situation for the Harriers that we had in the Marine Corps. So having almost 5,100 pounds of bring back for the Harrier, and replacing the Harrier was one of the highest priority issues for the Marine Corps. They wanted that capability to walk on land or at sea to be able to launch, do the mission they needed to do, and not wasting putting ordnance in the water. So we're good there. The one that I mentioned earlier, the interoperability, the critical information exchange requirements changed all the time. And so we were directed to go do this, and then we had to direct a contractor to go to do the same thing. And that's because, again, this was a fusion city of the aircraft with all the data coming in, and those requirements were changing constantly. But pretty much by 2006, we were back on track after we had our weight problem. Let's go back to January 2004. Critical design review is coming up. All through 2003, after the preliminary design review, we were trying to get our handle over this weight, but as data came in, as the design was going so fast, it wasn't looking good. We first noticed it in the airframe IPT. Every week in Crystal City, we would get a brief on the status of the cost and schedule from Lockheed Martin, and they had kind of a picture X of each of the IPTs, and you could see these control accounts being read. And it spread in the airframe IPT, it started spreading in mission IPT, in the vehicle systems IPT, and fundamentally it's like watching cancer spreading across the whole air system. And many of the KPPs, one after the other, which were the key performance priorities, we weren't going to make. We were not on a good track to get to critical design review. And so we had a meeting. We had a very brave program manager from Lockheed Martin stand in front of all the senior executives and gave just an incredible brief of 34 medium to high risk items that have to be resolved to get to first flight. And we're on the road to CDR. And I'm sitting there going, we got to do something. And so Admiral Steve Envald was the PEO at the time. When we come walking out of the brief, my brain is like going a million miles. At the time, we were burning, spending per month on the whole program, $400 million a month. $400 million a month. I'm going, what kind of options do we have to do this? And Admiral Envald says, what do you think, Kram? I said, year and a half delay, $7 billion. And he said, no, 7.5 billion, you forgot we got to fund the engines too. I said, oh yeah, we got to fund the engines. So that was a long flight back from Dallas-Fort Worth back to DC, because we'd already been looking at options of, if we're going to lose a variant, which one would we lose in order to recover any type of schedule or cost impact to anything. And Admiral Steve Envald, fantastic man, pulled a meeting with the Undersecretary AT&L, the senior executive person in the entire government, I should say DOD, SAF AQ, the senior executive for the Air Force, and ASNRDA for the Navy, had a meeting, kind of laid it out, and said, we need to stop. We need to stop and get the weight out of the airplane, because this will not be acceptable for the operators. So the stowable weight attack team was stood up. And the thought was, it's probably going to be about 6 months to go in and scrape this weight out of the airplane and slow down and get this airframe, this system back in the box to go. And that was the decision was made amongst those 3 people. And we had a schedule impact. I anticipated a year and a half. It actually turned out longer. And about $7.5 billion was added to the program. And later on, I found out they took it out of production money in the next POM period, turned that into research and development, and we had to replan the program. So that's how we covered the weight. What was interesting is one of the members of the program office had a father that worked on the lunar module way back in the day when it was overweight. And he came in, he was 80-some years old, and gave this brief to Lockheed Martin. It was just amazing. He says, can you imagine being said, if you don't get this vehicle under weight, we're not going to the moon? No pressure at all, and gave a very inspiring talk that this can be done. And this is a quote from Tom Burbridge, which I'll show you another book if you haven't seen it, F-35, and if you want to take pictures of it. I'm not getting any money off of this at all. Fantastic book. Tom Burbridge was the Senior VP and General Manager at Lockheed Martin at the time, and he'll lay out the stories that I'm telling you today, plus a whole lot of other stuff that after I left. But a few changes that could reduce the weight by hundreds of pounds, and hundreds of changes that could reduce the weight by a few pounds. And that is so spot on. The 2 biggest ones was a major structural change, and sorry about the picture there, but it was essentially the mating of the Northrop Grumman piece with the wing, and there was some overlap, and it was built, again, going back to manufacturing, to simplify the manufacturing process and reduce labor on the building of the airplane. That had to be re-looked at, and I can't remember how much weight was dropped, but I'm guessing around 500 pounds was dropped off on that. The stowable weapons bay, in the spirit of commonality, early on in the program, we said, hey, we've got 1,000-pound JDAM for the stowable and 2,000 pound for the other 2. Why don't we put a 2,000 pound in the stowable? Well, that's 400 pounds. But at that time, there wasn't a weight problem. So we did a contract change, made it all common, and well, we had to take that out, and there was 400 pounds saved right there. The work breakdown schedule. So if you ever seen a program, it has a whole bunch of levels where they allocate all the money, and in the engineering process, you had 1% margin on this, 2% on this, 1% here, and by the time you got up to the air vehicle, there were parts of the airplane that had 15% margin on it. So literally going through, scraping, getting the engineers to defend why it had to be this way. Can't you take a little bit more risk in this area and scrape out a pound here, half pound there, 2 pounds here. That's why it took 6 months to get all through this. And an interesting thing about the reduction incentives, amongst, I don't think Lockheed Martin, I think all the partners in industry was, it used to be, if you had an idea to save a pound on the airplane, you get $500. So that was an incentive. Well, that was increased to $2,000 a pound. So if you were an engineer that could save 10 pounds on this aircraft, that's $20,000 in your pocket. And the ideas came in like you would not believe. It was incredible. And some of them, I mean, you're just throwing stuff on the wall of ideas to get weight out. But it was an amazing recovery to see the cooperation amongst industry to get this weight down, okay? Now I'm going to show you these other charts, the little bit eye charts, but this will kind of demonstrate what happened. The 3 big charts you'll see is stowable, CTOL, and CV. Stowable was targeted first. It was the one with the most critical weight challenge, and then CTOL and then CV was tail end Charlie. And you can see that big up and down. Anywhere from 2,100 pounds to 2,500 pounds came out of the airplane in 6 months. Below that red line, which was the not to exceed line, because we knew as we went to critical design review, there'd be some more changes that had to be done on each of them. And a lot of those weight reduction ideas were also used in the CTOL. Remember the commonality between Stovall and CTOL? And the CV. And then they put a weight management process in place that if you came to a review and you added a half a pound, they zeroed in on that to say why. And it had to earn its way onto the airplane. That's the big change. The speed of the program slowed down, we got the weight out, and then going forward, there was a very disciplined process as we went into the rest of the program. The next chart is specifically, and by the way, that was the weight of the aircraft and the engine. This is the weights that you see here along the left side is just the Lockheed Air System contractor weight. Same type of chart, a little bit easier to see, but what highlights this is after they introduced the weight management strategy, from the time end of SWAT, Stovall Weight Attack Team, until, what's the date there? 2006, just before June 2006. The total change of weight was 134 pounds. So it was a combination of slowing down, scraping the weight out, and then putting in a very disciplined process to keep that weight down. The target weight, which they determined, remember the government didn't tell them meet this weight, and that's what got that airplane back to where it should be, where it could be as capable as it is today. So, I left the program in 2006. My only request from the program office, General Davis had taken over, I think at the time, was please invite me back for first flight. I want to see the baby fly. I'd spent a lot of time, a lot of hours through the design process. I was at Lockheed at least once a week, and for over 2 years. Because although we had net meetings, it's nothing better to be down at Lockheed in those meetings while all these design changes are going through. And while they started out in a TSPR situation, total system performance responsibility on the contractor, it melded into more of a real teammate type environment where they would ask our opinions on stuff. And of course we'd have to say, I'm not giving you direction, because I'm the government, but here's my thoughts, And as they got to know us, they valued those inputs, and I think it helped the overall design. It's always good to bounce it off of, because we had some tremendous experts from the Syscoms of all the services that came in and helped us. And so they really looked for us for help. We had to replan the contracts, optimize the design. That's what came out of Stovall. Manufacturing was underway for the first test aircraft. System development on track. You can imagine that 6 months and then 1.5 year delay really helped out in the critical design reviews. We had F-135 with 4,000 hours, F-136 right behind it. Again, 2 great superstar engine companies going at it, and things were back on track. And by that time, this is probably mid-2006, I was already gone from the program office, but I was watching from afar. Reflection. I could have put 100 bullets on this, but joint programs are hard, but international programs can be harder. I was fortunate to run the MIDS program, which was an international cooperative program. Once you're exposed to that environment, it prepares you very well to execute those things. You just need the right expertise in the program office to do that. And in that, we had, my assessment, top-notch talent everywhere. The countries that sent their representatives, I mean, think about it. You're Canada and you put 150 million into the development of this. Who are you going to send to represent your country in the program office? It was eye-watering. On the contractor side, the cream de la cream I saw across the board was just unbelievable. Particularly in the signature team, we had experts from the B2 that were on the contractor side. We had a lot of the F-22 guys working, and we weren't working so much on the signature. It was how can we maintain this better from all the experiences that they had. Fully understand the assumptions and concurrency, their risks, and the new inventions. We had a lot of new inventions in the program. Helmet was one, but there was numerous other things that if you're going to have new inventions, obviously if they can get prototyped in advance, get some lessons learned before you go right into development. But there were things that had not been developed, new inventions that we did on that program. You got to keep an eye on that. And going back to, the birth, it takes 9 months to make a baby, okay? And anything short of that, okay? I had preemies, you get a preemie. So I put this last chart up with kind of a comparison. The IOC, which is the initial operational capability, which is determined by the services, not by any of the acquisition folks, was originally 2013 for the CTOL, and they actually declared it August 2nd of 2016. Stovall was in July of 16. They were looking at 2012. They were actually willing to take the Block 2 software. It had some operational capability, but not total, like the Block 3. And they said, hey, we need this airplane so bad, we'll take Block 2 software. And that's why they were first. And then the Navy was, again, tail end Charlie. Original was 2013, and they declared IOC in 2019. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope I gave you some of the lens that I was looking through in the program, with as much facts as I could pull together after, how many years ago was that? 2023? So any questions for me? Oh.
Didn't I see you in Top Gun?
You did. The question was, did she ever see me in Top Gun? And I didn't put that in here, but and that's a whole nother brief. But I was fortunate to back in, now I'm going to date myself, 1985 when they were filming the first movie. I was asked to become one of the extras in there, and if you ever watch it, the airplane's taking off. They cut to a dark scene. A guy walks through the door and says, "Morning, Scott," and I turn and I say, "Morning, Vance," and the camera goes away. And now you're looking at me now. You're going to have to look real close, probably freeze it because I look a little bit different. Some of those pictures are similar, but. And then in the air crew at the end when we're taking off, the airplanes are taking off. Remember they had the pool scene, and they go to the ready room, and I was like in the second row. Tom Cruise was right across the aisle from me, and so I was in that scene as well. So I have 14 minutes and 45 seconds of fame left somewhere. So okay, yes. So that's the question, is the look of the airplane. What did you think of the one that was finally selected? They didn't call it the Mini Guppy for nothing. So obviously the X-35 looked more like a standard fighter aircraft that anyone would see, and a lot of people made fun of the look of the Super Guppy. Again, going back to the requirements, they were focused on reducing the cost of the manufacturing. So they had a very similar concept of the original Lockheed in some parts of how fast can we manufacture this thing, and that drove a lot of the shape of the aircraft. And also it didn't have the lift fan and other things. One interesting thing was the F-35 did all of its vertical testing on the Stovall at Palmdale, and I don't know what the elevation is there, about 3,000 feet, right? The X-32 did all of its performance stuff at Pax River. I was told, I wasn't there, that Boeing could not get that airplane to go vertical at 3,000 feet in the concept demonstration phase. So that's how impressive that whole lift fan system. You had 3,000 degree thrust out of the back end of the F-35 and 400 degree air coming out of that lift fan. But that provided the, unbelievable amount of thrust out of that lift fan that helped it out. And it was lightweight, so that's what helped out on that. So I hope that answered your question. And you, I think, yeah.
Just a quick question. Our partners, our wonderful partners, were they asked to know?
Were our partner nations, I assume is what you're talking about, required not to release any of our secrets? I would refer to the State Department. I didn't have anything to do with that. But there was a memorandum of understanding that was signed by all the countries, and I'm sure there was also classified stuff that was signed as well, and I'm sure that was one of the, they would not have been signed up if that was not agreed upon, in my mind. Okay? Yes?
How many aircraft are these variants
How many number of aircraft reach variant, I do not know. I think CTOL has the most. They were actually going to be the biggest buyer. Of the whole buy, when I was there, was going to be 2,500 for U.S. services, of which I think the Navy was around 700. But I don't have that data. Air Force had the most. And there was anticipated with the internationals to have another 2,500. So they were, because there's so many F-16 countries out there that this is a perfect replacement for them. So we're looking at a total buy of about 5,000 to start with before we got all the FMS. So, but I don't have the answer to that question. Okay, yes? Do we have any crises or problems with software? I can tell you that year and a half added to the schedule sure helped in that regard with software. Everyone was involved with software. I mean, the software was flowed down to Lockheed, to the subs, to the vendors that were providing stuff, all the way down. We knew software was going to be a problem, and whether it was the Block 1 or Block 2, they all had software, and software was usually what was caused delay. Today, TR3, Tech Refresh 3, is the one that was having problems just recently that stopped delivery of the F-35 by the program office to get that right. So it was one of the big risks in the program, is getting the software done, because it was massively integrated, very complex, and you just got to test the heck out of it. Get it into an airplane, you're going to find things when you fly it that's going to show up that you got to go fix. So that was a constant risk throughout the program, and it still is today. Well, let me go here and then I'll go over there. Yes?
Did the partner countries favor any particular configuration?
Any configuration. Did the partner countries favor any configuration? There were certain countries that had F-16s that all they were interested was CTOL. Okay? The Brits were interested in CV and Stovall, and they had the amphib type aircraft. So they were extremely interested and all in on the Bravos, and they went through the same consternations that we did in the U.S. of how many we're going to buy, what's the flavor of them, stuff like this. So they were concentrated more on them. But because there were so many F-16 countries in their Air Force worldwide, I don't care if they were partner countries or even looking at FMS countries, they were looking at CTOL, okay? And to tell you a little difference, the wing on the CV is very much larger, carries a lot more fuel, and that was to get 145 knots approach speed to a carrier. You get any faster than that, 150, like the F4 or something like that, you just don't have the time to correct and have a safer landing. So that was the need there. I'd heard that they had loaded up an F-35 with external weapons, and the approach speed was over 180 knots landing on a runway, because it has a much smaller wing, but you got to pull 9Gs. And if you would have made the CV 9G airplane, the airframe would be totally different than it is today. So, so pretty much those countries that were replacing F-16s, they were focused on CTOL, and UK kind of on 2, and then of course the US had to do all 3. Over here I saw a hand, yeah. Is the price same for all the countries? Of each variant, especially for the partner countries, yes, okay? And with that is another thing is, if you were a partner country, part of the offsets that the US government agreed to was for every F-35 that was sold, you got a levy back because you're a partner country. So they were very interested in Lockheed building a whole lot of airplanes, because that was going back into their treasury of each government. And if you're in Norway or the Dutch, what programs that you spend money on, does that money come back to their treasury? So they were all in on selling airplanes because of that. And that's not unusual. There's a lot of programs that are like that. But after Block 3 software, they had individual requirements. The development still went in. It just went outside of SDD, that they could offer up we want to integrate this into the airplane, we want to integrate this. They had to bring their own money to do that. And they're still doing that today. And many of their countries, for work share, right, they want their stuff going in the F-35 because that's money back into their country and stuff. So, interesting thing, we had CEO conferences. And those were fascinating to watch because the undersecretary was there and the undersecretaries of all the other countries were there. And it was like they had to do this. They were directed to do this. They complained that the airplane cost too much. And then they complained that their companies weren't getting the work share, but their country could be one of those that wasn't the best athlete that was costing $1 zillion, right? But they had to go on record that, you know, I'm not getting enough money back to my country, and damn, this airplane costs too much, you know, so that was always fascinating to watch. Okay, one more. You're going to have to speak up. China and stolen technology from the F-35. I read that as well. I was out of the program at the time. And this is the classic thing of hackers getting into not only government systems but also contractor systems. I heard like 1 terabytes of data were stolen, and you know that they've been doing that for years. So I'm not surprised that that happened. And you know, putting up those firewalls to keep people that shouldn't be in there has always been a challenge in all the programs. Okay. Oh, let me get this one.
Do the Russians have anything like comparable to this?
I personally, I have not seen it. The Russians have something similar to this. I have not seen it. I think I've seen something similar to the F-22, but not particularly, you know, single engine type of aircraft like this. I haven't seen it. Okay. They're telling me, they're giving me the hook, so I gotta leave. Thank you very much.